Have you ever wondered what it truly means to be alive when grief has taken everything? Yet somehow hope still knocks on the door. Elias Beckett, a man who buried his past in the wild Montana mountains, had sworn never to love again. Clara Whitfield, a city woman fleeing a life where marriage was nothing more than a contract, stumbled into his isolated world during a deadly storm. 2 broken souls, 1 snowbound cabin, and a choice that could change everything. What would you do if survival forced you into the arms of a stranger? If the only warmth against the storm was the same man who warned he couldn't control himself around you? Would you cling to fear, or risk your heart on love that feels impossible? This is not just a story of a city woman and a mountain man. It's a story of courage, of learning when to fight, when to stay, and when to love again, despite the pain of the past. Stay with us as we uncover their journey. And before we begin, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to the channel so you won't miss the stories that move hearts and stir memories. The wind tore across the Silverpine Territory mountains, rattling the log walls of a cabin that had stood as Elias Beckett's only companion for 15 long winters. He sat near the stone hearth, shaping a block of pine with steady hands, each cut born of habit more than purpose. The firelight flickered over his face, revealing lines carved by sorrow and years of solitude. At 39, Elias looked older. Dark hair, streaked early with gray, brushed his shoulders, while his beard grew wild and heavy. He had abandoned concern for appearances the day he laid Ruth and their unborn child to rest beneath the frozen earth of the Ashford Plains. That belonged to another life, when he was still a man who trusted in mercy and tomorrow. The cabin, no more than 20 feet square, was built with his own hands from logs dragged down the slope. Every notch filled with moss and mud was less a mark of craft than a shield against memory. A ladder rose to the loft where a straw mattress lay under thick furs. Below, the single room offered only what was needed: a rough table, 2 chairs, though only one was ever touched, shelves lined with dried meat and herbs, and rifles fixed above the door. A small glass window he had hauled all the way from Red Bluff framed a view of heavy December snow falling without pause. It was 1879, though Elias no longer kept track of days. Time blurred when every sunrise echoed the one before wake. Work, eat, sleep, and try not to dream. His stallion, Shadow, shifted in the lean-to stable at the west wall, restless against the storm. The black horse was the only living soul Elias trusted. Shadow wanted nothing beyond hay and shelter. He honored silence, kept his distance, and never asked why Elias sometimes paced the floor at dawn. Driven from his bed by nightmares, Elias set aside his carving a wolf, always wolves, and stirred the venison stew simmering in the iron pot. The buck had been taken 3 days before, dressed and cut with the speed of long practice. Life in these high ridges meant self-reliance or death. No store, no neighbor, no helping hand, just the way he preferred it. Pine Hollow, the nearest settlement, sat 2 days' ride through dangerous passes that claimed travelers each winter. He only went there twice a year, for salt, coffee, tobacco, whiskey, and cartridges. The townsfolk kept their distance. They called him the Hermit of Coyote Ridge, and crossed themselves when his tall, lean shadow cut down Main Street. He never corrected them. Words belonged to people who still clung to connection, who hadn't learned the truth Elias carried like stone in his chest. To love was to lose. Ruth's face still haunted him, though 15 years had blurred its features. Sometimes he forgot the exact color of her hair or the music of her laughter, but he remembered with clarity the moment her eyes went still, carrying their child with her. The frontier doctor had come late, drunk and stumbling, offering nothing but hollow prayers. The preacher spoke of providence, while Elias dug 2 graves in frozen soil. That night he burned their small homestead and rode west until the mountains swallowed him whole. In this wilderness fortress, he had built a life stripped bare of hope. No tokens, no portraits, no reminders of the man who once believed in happiness. Only wooden wolves gathered on the mantle, silent guardians shaped in countless empty nights. Wolves understood. They bonded for life, but hunted alone if they must. They survived with tooth and claw, guided by instinct and weariness, trusting nothing except their own strength. Outside, the storm deepened. December in Silverpine Territory could freeze a man's blood, bury horses in drifts, and scour skin raw with wind. But the cabin held. Its thick walls stood firm. The chimney drew clean, and warmth filled the room. He had chosen this place carefully, a south-facing hollow guarded by granite cliffs and fed by a spring that rarely froze. Game paths threaded the valleys below, promising meat for steady aim. Timber crowded every side, offering endless fuel. A man could vanish here forever without another human soul. That was his plan, to live alone, die alone, and let the mountains ask of him only strength and caution. They did not deceive or soften truths in the wilderness. Out here, the mountains spoke plainly. Avalanches roared without warning. Grizzlies wandered too close to a man's door. Storms swept down valleys with no mercy. At least those threats were honest. You could see them, hear them, prepare for them. Elias Beckett had long since made peace with that kind of danger. He pulled on his heavy buffalo coat, the thick hide creaking as he shifted his shoulders, and stepped into the storm. The wind struck him like a hammer. Snowflakes, sharp as salt on skin, drove against his face. This storm carried a different edge. It screamed with a fury that made the muscles in his jaw tighten. Old-timers in Pine Hollow would have called it a widowmaker, the kind that buried cabins and travelers without leaving so much as a broken trail behind. Shadow nickered when Elias pushed into the stable, the horse's dark bulk a warm anchor against the bitter air. Elias laid a hand on the stallion's neck, feeling the steady life thrumming beneath that winter coat. The contrast between horseflesh and the storm outside struck him with force. He forked hay into the manger, the sweet scent cutting through the musk of leather and animal. He cracked ice on the water bucket, the cold numbing his fingers even through his gloves. His body moved with muscle memory, the routine etched into his bones. But his mind wandered where it should not go. Did he have enough wood stacked behind the cabin to outlast a week of storms? Should he split more once the winds eased? Were the venison stores heavy enough to keep him through another stretch of isolation? Had he cleaned the rifle's action recently? These questions kept him steady. Practical questions. They were the walls he built in his head, walls that kept out other thoughts, dangerous ones. Sometimes in the long nights of Silverpine Territory, when the wind hushed for a moment and silence crept in, he caught himself imagining lives that had never existed. A boy with Ruth's hair running through summer fields, a girl laughing in the shadow of the porch that no longer stood, the warmth of a woman's hand pressed to his chest, dreams that belonged to a dead man. He cut those thoughts off fast. He had walked down that road before. It ended in bottles drained and a pistol on the table, the muzzle aimed at nothing worth killing. He had survived by choosing a different path, harder, colder, but steady. Survival was arithmetic, calories burned against calories stored, rounds fired against meat brought home, hours of wood split against nights of cold endured. These numbers told the truth. They never lied. When Elias secured the stable door against the gale, he stilled. His breath frosted in the air as he listened. The storm's voice had shifted. It carried an urgency that curled the hair on his neck. He had lived among these ridges too long not to hear the difference. This was no ordinary squall. It howled with menace, warning that someone out there tonight might not see morning. His thoughts flickered to the stage road below. Each week, the coach from Red Bluff fought its way toward Pine Hollow, carrying passengers who believed themselves brave enough to test the frontier. Surely no driver would risk that pass now. Even the greenhorns from Providence Bay, fresh off the train, learned quick that Silverpine storms devoured fools whole. How Elias shook the thought away and trudged back to his cabin. He dropped the bar across the door, fed another log to the fire, and returned to his chair. Knife in hand, he set to carving again. The block of pine surrendered to practice strokes, the wolf within it taking shape beneath his blade. This one would stand with its head thrown back, mouth open in a cry to the empty night sky. It was a familiar pose. The wolves he carved always told his truth. You howled, but nothing answered. You loved, and it was taken. You built, and the earth swallowed it whole. Out here, nothing promised forever. The storm raged harder, rattling the walls, making the logs groan as if the mountain itself leaned against them. Elias glanced toward the window, though snow now coated it thick. Somewhere in that madness, he knew a man or woman was learning the same lesson he had learned 15 years ago. Harsh teachers, these mountains, their tuition was paid in blood. But it was not his concern. He had already paid. He had dug his graves in the Ashford Plains and burned what was left behind. Whatever hardship this storm carried, it belonged to someone else now. His task was simple. Keep the fire alive. Keep the roof standing. Wait it out. All storms passed eventually. Tomorrow the sky would clear. The cold would turn sharp enough to bite a man's lungs, but the air would be still. Perfect tracking weather, should he need fresh meat. Perhaps the day after he might follow the trap lines that ran along Birch Creek. If the drifts eased, he could even push into the high meadows, where elk moved like shadows across the snow. His world was simple, and simplicity meant safety. He had no expectations, no disappointments, no graves left to dig. Just a man and his mountain locked in a contract of survival. It was not joy, but it was enough. The blizzard raged all night, as though the fury of every winter demon had been loosed upon Coyote Ridge. Elias dozed in his chair, waking at each new shift of the wind, every time the timbers shuddered under its weight. By morning, the storm's voice had weakened to a hoarse moan. When he pushed the cabin door open, he fought against a drift waist high. Beyond it, the world glittered with deceptive beauty. The storm had sculpted the familiar into something unearthly. Boulders and pines bent beneath strange curves of white, frozen in place like waves mid-crash. Silence pressed down heavy, filling his ears until he swore he could hear the blood in his veins. Shadow's restless call drew him back to the stable. The stallion pawed at the floor, ears pricked toward the valley. Elias frowned. He trusted that instinct. Horses felt what men could not yet see. He saddled Shadow, the black coat steaming in the cold, strapped snowshoes to his back, and lifted his rifle from its pegs. The air burned in his lungs as they descended. The drifts were deep enough to swallow any ordinary beast, but Shadow moved sure-footed, shouldering through, guided by the mountain sense that had saved them both before. Elias said nothing. Words were wasted when a man was listening. The silence after a storm was never empty. It was a waiting silence, as if the land itself held its breath. He felt it now, a stillness too sharp, a pause before something else began. And as they moved down the slope, into the valley that only yesterday had been hidden under fury, Elias could not shake the weight pressing between his shoulder blades. The storm had left more than snow behind. Something waited out there in the white silence, and Shadow had already heard it. The old stage road lay buried under a white ocean of snow. But Elias Beckett knew every rise and hollow of the land. He had hunted these slopes for 15 years, learning each boulder and pine until they were etched in his memory like a map. He read the mountain as another man might read a well-worn book. Once, long ago, he had memorized a woman's face with the same devotion, though the years had worn those features thin in his mind. An hour into his descent through the drifts, Shadow stopped. The stallion's nostrils flared, ears pinned forward. Elias slid down from the saddle and unshouldered his rifle. He trusted the horse's instincts more than his own. Pushing through a cluster of snow-laden pines, he froze at what lay beyond. The stagecoach rested on its side like a discarded toy, one wheel still turning slowly in the wind. Snow had piled against the frame, burying part of its painted paneling. 4 horses lay in their harnesses, bodies stiff and eyes clouded with ice. The driver hung at an unnatural angle from his seat, face pale in death. Elias approached cautiously. The danger had passed long ago. Mailbags lay ripped open, their contents scattered across the snow letters. Parcels, children's toys, a fine lady's gloves, pieces of lives torn apart in the storm. He had seen death before, too many times, but this wreck unsettled him in ways he could not explain. The coach looked less like it had tipped in the wind and more like it had been driven off the road at speed, as if fleeing something unseen. A sound pricked his ears. Not the groan of timber, not shifting snow. Softer, human. Elias moved around the wreck, boots sinking deep. He passed a man sprawled in city clothes, likely a passenger thrown from the coach. Another figure lay half buried in a drift, clad in the rough gear of a hired guard. The sound came again, weak and strained. Near a boulder, he spotted fabric peeking through the snow. Expensive fabric. He dropped to his knees, setting his rifle within reach, and dug with his gloved hands. Snow fell away to reveal a woman's traveling cloak of fine wool trimmed with fur. Then a gloved hand, delicate as a child's. His urgency rose, though he did not care to examine why. At last he uncovered her fully. She was curled tight, arms wrapped around herself, chestnut hair tangled over her face. Her blue dress, torn and sodden, had been made for city streets, not mountain passes. Lace cuffs and ivory buttons belonged in parlors, not in blizzards. He touched 2 fingers to her throat, bracing for the stillness of death. There a faint flutter, a pulse so fragile it seemed ready to vanish. He drew back, torn. He should leave her. The mountains were merciless, and nothing good ever came from taking another's burden. He had learned that lesson on the Ashford Plains, carved into his soul with the graves of Ruth and the child who never drew breath. This woman would die anyway, from the cold or from wounds he could not see. Yet his hands were already lifting her. She was feather light, little more than soaked fabric and chilled skin. Her head fell against his shoulder, and he caught a glimpse of her face. Young, no more than her mid-20s, refined features that spoke of a world of comfort. A woman who had likely never split wood, dressed a deer, or dug frozen earth for a grave. Shadow stood steady as Elias struggled into the saddle with the woman in his arms. He managed at last, settling her before him, his arms encircling her to grip the reins. Her chilled body pressed close, drawing what little warmth he could give through the thick layers of his coat. The ride back became a race against time. Her breath grew shallower with each minute. Elias urged Shadow through drifts that could have swallowed them both. He pushed the horse harder than he ever had for his own sake. He did not ask himself why. He would not have liked the answer. By the time they reached the cabin, the sun was overhead, though its thin light gave no comfort. Elias carried her inside, kicking the door shut. The fire had burned low. He set her gently on the rug before the hearth and forced his thoughts into order. Wet clothes killed faster than wounds. He knew that truth as well as he knew how to breathe. His fingers fumbled with the buttons of her dress. When had his hands begun to tremble? He stripped away sodden fabric, piece by piece, layers of corset and linen unfamiliar to his calloused fingers. It felt like trespass, though necessity left him no choice. He remembered Ruth's body, strong and kind, shaped by labor on the plains. This woman's pale skin felt fragile, foreign, as though it did not belong in this rough-hewn cabin. He turned his face aside as he worked, keeping his mind fixed on survival, not the curves the wet fabric revealed. At last he wrapped her in the thick buffalo robe from his bed and stoked the fire until it roared. Her clothes he draped over chairs and pegs, transforming the cabin into something like a lady's dressing room. Steam rose, filling the air with the scent of wool and something else, lavender, rose. Perfume clung to the fabric, faint and ghost-like, a reminder of the world she had come from. She did not stir. Her marble pallor had softened, faint pink returning to her cheeks, but her eyes stayed closed. Elias crouched beside her, one hand pressed near her jaw to feel for breath. Still shallow, still faint, but present. He sat back on his heels, staring into the fire. He had not invited this, had not wanted it. The mountains had given him solitude, and solitude had kept him alive. Now, in a single storm, that life was broken open. He told himself she would not last the night, that nature would claim her regardless of what he did. But even as he thought it, he was rising again, feeding the fire, checking the robe around her, listening for each fragile breath. Dark lashes lay against pale cheeks, the kind that had likely never known a day's sun without a parasol. Her chestnut hair, freed from its pins, spread in damp waves across the buffalo robe. Elias Beckett sat back on his heels, suddenly conscious of what he had done. He had carried a woman into his sanctuary, shattered the rule that had kept him alive for 15 years. No entanglements, no caring. And yet here she was, breathing softly in front of his fire. He told himself she would not live long. If she did, she would want to leave, would need him to guide her back to Pine Hollow, would expect words, comfort, explanations, all the human graces he had lost along with Ruth and the life buried on the Ashford Plains. Already, the air in the cabin felt different, as if charged with her presence. He should have left her beneath the snow, but he had not. Her life now lay in his hands, whether he welcomed it or not. Elias tossed more wood on the flames, the sparks rising up the chimney. He sank into his chair and waited. He had done all he could. The rest was up to her and whatever God she had once prayed to. Elias had not spoken a prayer in 15 years, not since that winter day when God had taken everything and left him with silence. Hours dragged by. The sun edged its way across the sky, slanting through the small glass window and pooling across the floorboards. Elias found himself watching the steady rise and fall of her chest beneath the robe, each breath an answer to a question he had not dared ask. Alive, still alive. By late afternoon, as the light grew golden, she stirred. A faint sound escaped her lips, the first he had heard from her. Elias leaned forward, then stopped. What could he possibly say when she opened her eyes? How did a man explain to a city-bred lady that he had stripped her of her clothes and wrapped her in his bed covers, just to keep her breathing? Her eyes opened suddenly, unfocused at first, green, bright, startling green like the first buds of spring. For a heartbeat she stared upward, dazed. Then her gaze locked on him. Confusion hardened into terror. She screamed. The cry shattered the cabin's silence like a musket shot. She tried to sit up, realized her state beneath the robe, and screamed again. Her hands clutched the buffalo hide at her throat as she scrambled backward until her shoulders struck the log wall. "You're safe," Elias said, raising both hands to show they were empty. His voice sounded strange to his own ears, rough and unused. "There was an accident. Your coach. Don't touch me." She pressed flat against the logs, eyes darting around the cabin. "Where am I? What did you do to me?" Her gaze landed on her garments draped near the fire. Horror washed over her face. "You were freezing," Elias said carefully, speaking as he might to a spooked colt. "The wet clothes would have killed you. I did only what was needed to keep you alive. Necessary." Her voice climbed to a ragged pitch. "You call this necessary?" The words faltered, unable to carry the fear twisting inside her. Elias rose slowly and moved to the far side of the cabin, putting space between them. "Your coach went down in the storm. Everyone else is gone. You would be too if I had not found you." The words cut through her panic. She froze. "Everyone." He nodded. He thought of the child's toy scattered in the snow and could not bring himself to say more. Her face crumpled. The sound that left her was not the restrained sob of a lady, but a raw, wrenching grief that tore through the small room. She wept with her whole body, shoulders shaking, breath catching. Elias stood helpless, watching her world collapse. He remembered his own collapse, how he had clutched Ruth's still hand in their empty house until the neighbors dragged him away. At least this woman did not weep alone. When her sobs quieted at last, she dragged a trembling hand across her face. Her eyes, though swollen, carried new weight, the shock of someone aged in minutes. "Forgive me," she said, her voice hoarse. "I lost myself. You saved my life." "You needed saving," Elias replied simply. "I am Clara Whitfield, of Providence Bay." She drew the buffalo robe closer around herself, reclaiming what dignity she could. "And you are Elias Beckett." He offered nothing more. What else could he say that he was half a ghost, existing on scraps of venison and silence, that her presence felt like standing too close to fire after years in the cold? "How soon can we reach town?" she asked, attempting composure, though her voice trembled. Elias glanced at the window, where flakes drifted once more against the glass. "The storm isn't done. Could be days, could be a week." Her composure cracked. "A week? Surely you exaggerate. This is not the Dark Ages." "This is Silverpine Territory," he said flatly. "The storms here don't care what year it is." She absorbed the words slowly. In her world, there had always been telegrams, rescue parties, a way to send for help. Out here, there was nothing but snow, silence, and a stranger's cabin. Her chin lifted a fraction, green eyes steady though her hands still shook around the robe. "Then I suppose," she said with effort, "that we will have to endure what cannot be changed." Elias inclined his head, though inside he cursed his own weakness at the wreck. He had carried her from the snow. Yes. But in doing so, he had invited chaos into the only peace he had left. The cabin that had been his fortress now carried the scent of lavender. The firelight flickered over a face too alive for him to ignore. And as the storm thickened outside, Elias Beckett knew that whatever came of this, the walls he had built over 15 years were already beginning to crack. Clara Whitfield of Providence Bay sat wrapped in Elias Beckett's buffalo robe, her presence bending the quiet order of his cabin into something unfamiliar. Outside, the storm gathered itself for another round, the wind scraping against the logs as if testing their strength. Inside, two strangers measured one another across a gulf wider than the miles between the eastern seaboard and the Silverpine Territory. It was the gulf between survival and living. That first night strained every barrier Elias had built over 15 years. Clara sat near the fire, stiff-backed, clutching the robe around herself like armor. Elias busied himself with tasks that did not need doing, tightening the bar across the door, shifting rifles he had already checked twice, stirring a stew that had simmered for hours. "I need my clothes," she said finally. Her accent carried the clipped edge of city refinement, as sharp and out of place in the cabin as glass in a stone wall. "They're still wet," Elias answered without looking up. Tomorrow. This is intolerable." She shifted, wincing at the movement. "Surely you have anything more suitable than this." He did, of course, though handing her his clothes felt like opening another breach in walls he had sworn would never fall. But her discomfort gnawed at him. With a sigh, he crossed to the old trunk beneath his bed and pulled out a flannel shirt and a pair of wool trousers, patched but clean. "These will be too big," he muttered, setting them near her. "I'll manage." She lifted an eyebrow. "Waiting." "I'll see to the horse." Elias grabbed his coat and stepped outside, the cold cutting through him with sharp clarity. Shadow shifted in his stall, ears twitching as if reading his master's agitation. Elias stroked the stallion's neck. "Don't look at me like that," he muttered. "I know what I'm doing." Shadow snorted, unconvinced. When Elias returned, Clara had changed. His clothes hung loose on her frame, cuffs rolled several times, sleeves drooping past her hands, but she sat straighter now, her chin lifted, dignity patched together from borrowed cloth. "Thank you," she said stiffly, "though I fail to see why a rescue requires arrangements this primitive." "You fail to see a lot," Elias replied, his patience thinning, "starting with the fact you're lucky to be breathing." Her green eyes flashed. "How fortunate for me that a mountain recluse happened along. Tell me, Mr. Beckett, do you often rescue half-dead women, or am I the rare exception?" "First in 15 years, he said flatly, "and it reminds me why I stopped." They glared across the fire, neither willing to back down. Then, to his surprise, Clara let out a sharp laugh, brittle as cracked glass. "Forgive me. My mother would faint at my manners. Here you've saved my life, and I behave like a frightened fool." "It's natural," Elias said. "Nothing about this is natural." She gestured to the cabin, to her oversized clothes. 3 days ago, I dined at the Crescent Hotel in St. Louis. Now I sit here, dressed like a lumberjack in a cabin that could fit inside my bedroom back home." The question slipped out before he could stop it. "Why were you on that coach?" Her expression shuddered. "Heading west, to Pacific City. I have family there." It was an evasion, clear as smoke in the wind. But Elias did not press. Everyone came west running from something. "You'll need food," he said instead, ladling stew into a bowl and setting it near her. She accepted it with hesitation, then took a cautious bite. Surprise flickered in her eyes. "This is good. Venison, wild onions, cattail roots. Cattail roots." She eyed her spoon suspiciously. "Won't kill you. Already saved you from freezing. Wouldn't make sense to poison you now." A small laugh slipped from her lips. Softer this time. I suppose that's logical in a frontier sort of way. They ate in silence, but it was no longer sharp silence. When she finished, she startled him by asking for more. He filled her bowl again without comment, though inside he noted it. City ladies, he remembered, never ate with such hunger, but near death changed a person's appetite. When the last of the stew was gone, she set the bowl aside. "Where do I sleep?" The question hung between them. Elias jerked his chin toward the ladder. "Loft. I'll stay by the fire." "That hardly seems fair." "This is your home. Life's not fair. You need rest more than I do." "Floor's fine for me." She looked ready to argue, then thought better of it. Rising slowly, she swayed, steadying herself against the wall before crossing to the ladder. Elias turned his gaze aside as she climbed awkwardly in the oversized trousers. At the top, she paused. "Mr. Beckett." Her voice floated down softly. "Thank you. Whatever my behavior, I am grateful." He grunted, banking the fire, but sleep would not come. Each sound from above the creak of straw, the rustle of blankets, a sigh reminded him that his solitude had been breached. When had another person's breathing last filled these walls? He thought of Ruth, restless and heavy with child, shifting in their bed while he whispered promises he could not keep. By dawn, his exhaustion was bone deep. Clara descended the ladder more steadily this time, having figured how to manage the clothes. Her green eyes met his briefly, cool but not hostile. The storm still howled outside, but inside the cabin, the silence between them had shifted no longer pure suspicion, not yet trust, but something unsettled, fragile, and new. Her hair hung in a long braid over one shoulder, the chestnut strands darker at the ends where they had dried by the fire. Somehow she had found his comb without asking, and now a touch of color had returned to her cheeks. When she greeted him with a formal good morning, it sounded as though they were standing in a polished drawing room in Providence Bay, rather than a rough cabin high in the Silverpine Territory. Elias poured her a tin cup of coffee, black and bitter, nothing like what she had likely sipped from porcelain cups in her former life. She accepted it without complaint, drinking slowly as if determined to prove she was not delicate. That surprised him. Most refined women he remembered from long ago would have turned up their noses. "I need to check the storm," Elias said after a while, reaching for his coat. "See how long we're pinned here. May I come with you?" Her request startled him. "Why?" "Because I am tired of being treated as if I might break." Her voice carried an edge of steel. "I traveled for 3 months on my own. Mr. Beckett, I am not as fragile as you believe. You nearly froze to death yesterday. But I didn't." She met his gaze directly. "I want to see where I am, to understand my situation. Surely that's not too much to ask." Against his better judgment, he gave a short nod. From the trunk he pulled out an old coat that had once belonged to Ruth. For a moment his hand lingered on it. He had always meant to burn the thing, but here it was pressed into new use. Clara bundled herself in it, and though it swallowed her frame, she managed to stand with a strange dignity. Outside, the storm had laid another 2 feet of snow across the mountain. The world was blanketed in white so heavy that trees bent nearly to the ground, and the landscape itself seemed erased. Clara stood in silence, her breath fogging the air, taking in the stark immensity. "Dear God," she whispered, "it looks like another world." "Welcome to the Silverpine," Elias said, pointing toward the buried valleys. "Pine Hollow lies that way 2 days on horseback in decent weather. Red Bluff's 5 days east. Nothing else for 100 miles. She turned slowly, seeing for the first time what true wilderness meant. No smoke drifting from neighbors' chimneys, no church bells, no sound of wheels on cobblestone, or voices echoing off brick walls. Only mountains, sky, and silence. "You live here alone?" she asked. 15 years. Why? The question came softly, but it carried more weight than curiosity. Elias did not answer. "What drives a man to this kind of emptiness?" she pressed. He countered instead. "What drives a woman to flee Providence Bay for Pacific City?" Clara's jaw tightened. "That's different, is it?" They stood there in the snow, 2 people carrying secrets heavy as stone. At last, her voice dropped to a whisper. "My fiancé, Richard Peyton. It was a deal struck between our fathers when I was 16. The wedding was set for next month. You ran, like a thief in the night." Her bitterness was sharp, almost self-directed. "I took what money I could gather, bought passage west, and thought I might disappear. Thought I could start again, become someone new." Elias regarded her steadily. "The West has a way of giving people that chance. More than a few out here are trying to leave old names behind. And you," she asked carefully, "who were you before?" The air between them felt colder. Elias turned back toward the cabin. Someone who learned better. That evening, the rhythm of the cabin shifted. Clara moved about the small room, helping prepare dinner with surprising skill for someone raised in drawing rooms and parlors. Her hands, though manicured, proved deft with a knife. She examined the carved wolves on the mantel, running her fingers across the wooden shapes with quiet admiration. "You made these?" she asked. He shrugged. "Passes the time. They're beautiful. So alive." Her sincerity stirred something in him, though he would not admit it. "Could you teach me?" she asked suddenly. "Carving's not for ladies. Neither is fleeing a marriage contract or living through a coach wreck," she said, picking up one of his knives to test its weight. "Yet here I am, and I need something to keep my hands busy. Idleness leaves too much room for thought." Elias studied her for a moment, recognizing the truth in her words. Long nights with nothing but memory to fill them could destroy a person. At last he gave a small nod. "Maybe." They sat by the fire together, Elias showing her how to angle the blade, how to feel the grain. Her first attempts left splinters and curls of wasted wood, and more than once she muttered a sharp word that would have scandalized half of Providence Bay society. Yet she persisted, brow furrowed in concentration, until she held up a rough shape that looked faintly like a cat. "It's awful," she said with a laugh, her eyes sparkling. "It's a start, for the first time in years." Elias felt the edge of a smile tug at him. "Tomorrow," he said, "we'll try pine. Easier to shape, more forgiving. Like Montana men," she teased lightly, casting him a glance. "Nothing forgiving about Montana men," he said gruffly, though without his usual bite. Later, as she climbed the ladder to the loft, she paused and looked down at him. "Mr. Beckett, do you ever regret it? Choosing this life?" Her question cut deeper than she could know. Regrets for people who believe they had better choices. She nodded slowly, understanding more than he intended. "Good night." Then, Elias lay awake by the fire long after the cabin went quiet, shadows dancing on the ceiling. 3 days she had been here, and already the place felt changed. Her presence stirred something inside him. Not hope, no, but the faint memory of connection. And for a man who had sworn off such things, that was dangerous ground. Tomorrow, he told himself, he would check the weather again. With luck, the storm would ease, and he could take her down to Pine Hollow. She would catch another coach to Pacific City, vanish into her new life, and his world would return to its careful emptiness. That was what he wanted. That was what he needed. Above him, Clara shifted in the loft, murmuring something in her sleep. Elias closed his eyes, but rest would not come. The sound she made in her sleep that night was soft, unguarded, heartbreakingly human. Elias closed his eyes against the flood of feeling it woke in him. He had done his part. He had dragged her from the snow and given her warmth. That was all. It could never be more. But when sleep finally claimed him, his dreams betrayed him. He dreamed of green eyes, carved wolves, and the sound of a woman's laughter thawing the frozen silence of his cabin like spring breaking through the last grip of winter. The storm pressed on into its 5th day. Relentless and heavy, snow piled higher against the walls, and the wind howled through the pines with a voice that seemed intent on keeping them prisoner. Inside, the rhythm of life had shifted. Claire no longer clung to the pretense of Boston manners. She moved about in Elias's patched flannel and trousers with surprising ease, her hair always pulled into a single braid that fell down her back. Her pale hands, once delicate and unused to rough work, now showed faint lines of callus from splitting kindling and handling his knives. "Show me how to split wood," she announced one morning, watching as Elias sharpened his axe with long, steady strokes. "You'll hurt yourself," he answered. "Then teach me properly, so I won't." Her arms folded across her chest, chin lifting in that stubborn way of hers. "I refuse to sit here useless while you do everything." Elias studied her a long moment. The woman who had screamed at waking half undressed in his cabin had become someone different, someone harder to dismiss. Finally, he set the axe aside and fetched the small hatchet. "Fine, but you start with kindling." Outside, the storm had eased into occasional gusts. He showed her how to set her stance, how to let her body weight carry the swing, how to read the grain of the wood. Clara watched intently, questions spilling from her lips, not as challenges, but with the hunger of someone determined to learn. Her first attempts were clumsy, all arm strength and no follow-through, the blade bouncing harmlessly. But she adjusted, listening to his corrections, and on her 4th swing, the log cracked clean. "I did it." Her face lit with triumph. "Don't celebrate yet," Elias said gruffly, though the tightness in his chest betrayed him. "We'll need enough for 3 days at least." She laughed, rolling up her sleeves, and attacked the wood pile with renewed determination. Elias found himself fighting an unfamiliar urge to smile. When had his rigid routines become something to share instead of endure alone? That afternoon, while Clara sat near the fire practicing her carving a crooked bird slowly taking shape, Elias discovered something that stole his breath. The flour barrel was nearly empty. The venison hung thinner than he had realized. He had planned for one, not 2. "Something's wrong," Clara said, noticing his frown. "Food's running low," Elias admitted. Her face fell. "Because of me? I've been eating your winter supplies." "Can't be helped," he said, trying to brush it aside. But worry gnawed at him. If the storm stretched much longer, hunger would become a real threat. "Can we hunt?" she asked. He looked at her sharply. "You know anything about hunting?" "No, but I can learn." Her chin lifted again, that same stubborn defiance. "I caused this strain. I should help. Hunting isn't like chopping wood. It's killing." "I understand," she said quietly. "But if it must be done for survival, then I must understand it too." Something shifted inside Elias then. Clara Whitfield was not simply a city lady playing at frontier life. There was iron beneath her silk, practical courage, the kind that came only when someone had already been pushed to their limits. "Tomorrow," he said at last, "if the wind stays calm, I'll show you snares, safer than starting with a rifle." That evening, their supper was little more than cornmeal mush and the last scraps of venison. Clara ate without complaint, but afterward she grew thoughtful. "May I ask you something?" Elias tensed but gave a nod. "The coat you gave me, it belonged to someone, didn't it?" His hand stilled on the carving knife. "My wife, Ruth." Her voice softened. "How long ago?" 15 years, 2 months, 11 days. The precision slipped from him before he could stop it. Clara absorbed his words without flinching. "Is that why you came here, to escape the memories Elias set down the wolf he had been shaping? Came here to stop making new ones? I'm sorry. I shouldn't have asked. You're wearing her coat. Natural, you'd wonder." He rose abruptly, needing the air of the stable. Shadow nickered softly when he entered, pressing his warm muzzle into Elias's shoulder. Elias leaned against the stallion, breathing in the smell of hay and horse, grounding himself. Clara's question had cracked open doors he had locked tight, and the draft of old pain stung sharp. Yet beneath the ache, something else stirred a realization that speaking Ruth's name aloud had not destroyed him. The world had not ended. When he returned, Clara had banked the fire and tidied the small space. She sat on the hearth rug, bent over her carving with fierce concentration. The domesticity of the sight struck him like a hammer blow. For a moment, it was as if he had stumbled into the life he used to dream about before grief had burned him hollow. "I'm learning wings are the hardest," Clara said without looking up, "getting the feathers to look right," grateful for the simple topic. Elias sank down beside her, closer than usual. "Forget the feathers for now. Think of the wing's shape, the way it rides the air." He reached out, guiding her hand to angle the knife properly. Their fingers brushed, and she drew in a sharp breath. The blade slipped, nicking her thumb. She gasped, dropping the wood. Blood welled bright against her pale skin. Without thinking, Elias caught her hand. "Not deep. Hold still." He fetched clean cloth and the whiskey he kept for injuries. Clara winced when the alcohol stung, but she didn't pull away. Her hand rested in his, impossibly small yet steadier than he expected, calluses just beginning to form along her palm. Elias wrapped the cut with care, his rough fingers gentler than she would have imagined. For a long moment, neither spoke. The fire popped softly, filling the silence between them. When at last their eyes met, Clara did not look away. When had he last touched another living soul with care, instead of necessity? Elias tied the cloth around her thumb slowly, making sure it would hold. He should have let go then, but he didn't, and she didn't pull away. For a moment they sat locked in silence, her small hand cupped inside both of his, the fire popping softly between their heartbeats. Clara lifted her green eyes to his, and something charged past between them, a recognition of two wounded people finding brief shelter in one another. The awareness jolted him. He released her hand as if it burned. "Keep it clean," he muttered. "It'll heal fine." "Thank you," she whispered, her voice unsteady. He retreated to his chair, putting the fire's glow between them. Still, the warmth of her skin lingered against his palms long after. By morning, the weather showed its first sign of mercy. A thin strip of pale sun broke through the heavy sky, and the wind had died to a faint whisper. Elias seized the chance to check the traps he had scattered across the ridge. Against his better judgment, he let Clara come along. She followed him closely, her borrowed coat swallowing her frame, her braid tucked inside the collar. He showed her how to set a snare, the patience required, the way to hide human scent. She watched carefully, the same concentration she had shown with carving. When they found a rabbit in one of the traps, Elias knelt, showing her how to end its life quickly. "Quick and clean," he said. "No suffering." Clara nodded, her face pale but resolute. Later, when they came across another rabbit, she insisted on trying. Her hands trembled, but she managed it. Her lips pressed tight. Afterward, she stared at the small body in her palms, sadness softening her features. "I know it's necessary," she said, voice quiet, "but I don't think it will ever be easy." "The day it gets easy," Elias told her, "is the day you've lost something worth keeping." She looked at him then, her green eyes so sharp it felt like she could see into the marrow of him. "Is that why you live alone? To keep from losing the rest of your humanity?" The question struck too close. "We should head back," he said roughly. "The storm could change again." As they moved through the snow-muffled woods, Clara slipped on an icy patch. Instinct moved faster than thought. Elias caught her, his arms wrapping firmly around her waist, pulling her back against his chest before she could fall. "I'm all right," she whispered. But she didn't move away, and neither did he. For an instant, the forest itself seemed to hold its breath. No birds called, no wind stirred. Elias felt the heat of her through the layers of wool and leather, her shape fitting into him as though carved there. The faint scent of his own soap mixed with something unmistakably her own drifted to him. This was danger greater than wolves or storms. This was the edge of a cliff he had promised himself never to walk again. Then Clara tilted her face upward, her eyes meeting his. "Elias," she breathed, his name escaping her lips for the first time. The sound broke through his paralysis. He stepped back abruptly, almost rough in the way he put space between them. "Storm's coming back. We need to move." Her cheeks flushed, but she simply nodded. They returned in silence, each step weighted with what had nearly happened. That night the cabin felt too small. Every brush of a hand, every movement around the fire, every glance across the table seemed to spark against raw nerves. Even the air between them felt charged, heavy with words unsaid. "I should check the stage road tomorrow," Elias said suddenly, the words harsher than he intended. "See if it's passable." Clara's hand stilled in the wash basin, where she had been rinsing dishes, another skill she had stubbornly taken up. "Of course," she said evenly. "You must be eager to reclaim your solitude." "It's not about me," he said quickly. "You need to reach Pacific City. Your aunt's expecting you." "Yes, my aunt." She scrubbed harder at the plate, the motion sharper than necessary. "Heaven forbid I disrupt your hermit existence any longer than required." "Clara Miss Whitfield," she corrected. Her voice clipped. "We should keep proper boundaries. After all, I'll be gone soon." The formality stung deeper than he would admit. He dipped his head stiffly. "As you wish. Miss Whitfield." They finished the chores in brittle silence. When Clara climbed the ladder to the loft, she didn't pause to say good night. Elias sat by the fire alone, his knife biting viciously into the wood. The delicate wolf he had been shaping splintered beneath strokes too angry to guide. What was wrong with him? He should have felt relief at the thought of her leaving. Relief and nothing else. But the truth settled into him with unwelcome clarity. The idea of returning to silence, to long nights without the sound of her laugh or the sight of her brow furrowed in concentration, felt like staring into the mouth of death for the second time. She had woken something inside him. Not just desire, though God knew that fire burned hot enough, but something deeper. A reminder of what it meant to share even the smallest piece of life with another soul. And that, he knew, was the most dangerous thing of all. The wind picked up outside, rattling the shutters with renewed fury. His plan to check the stage road vanished with the first wail of the storm's return. Snow lashed against the glass, piling higher against the door. They were trapped again, with no telling for how long. Elias rose stiffly, his bones aching from another night on the hard floor. As he turned toward the ladder, he froze. From above came the muffled sound of crying soft, restrained, as if she were trying not to be heard. Clara, weeping quietly into the straw mattress. The sound pierced him deeper than any blade. Every instinct told Elias to stay by the fire and let Clara's muffled sobs fade on their own. She had a right to her grief, and it wasn't his place to intrude. But his feet betrayed him. They carried him across the cabin, to the base of the ladder. "Clara," he called softly, his voice rough from disuse. "Are you hurt?" The crying stilled. A pause. Then her voice, faint but sharp. "Go away. Are you hurt?" He pressed again. "No." A long silence stretched between them. He should have stopped there. Instead, the words slipped out unbidden. "Then what's wrong?" "Everything." She burst out. The single word cracked open all the composure she had been clinging to. "I'm stuck in this cabin with a man who saved my life, but can barely stand to look at me. I'm wearing a dead woman's coat. Everyone I traveled with is gone. I thought I was starting over, but now I don't even know who I am anymore." The rawness in her voice tugged at something deep inside Elias, something he had walled off for 15 long years. Before he could talk himself out of it, he climbed the ladder. Clara sat hunched on the straw mattress, her face blotched with tears, looking far younger and more fragile than she ever let herself appear. "You're not trapped," he said quietly. "And don't think I can't look at you. That's the problem." Her eyes widened, realization dawning. "Elias." "I know." He sat on the floor near her, careful to leave space between them. "I know all the reasons this is foolish. But you're not alone. Clara. Not here. Not with me." Fresh tears spilled, softer this time, tentatively. She reached out, and to his own surprise, he didn't pull back. Her hand slipped into his, and they sat like that, two broken souls tethered by a single touch while the storm howled outside. By morning, Clara was up before him, already moving briskly about the cabin. She had stoked the fire, boiled coffee, and cut the last of the bread. She worked with purpose, but she wouldn't meet his eyes. "About last night," she began. Her back turned as she sliced. "Nothing happened last night." Elias interrupted, voice deliberately even. "No, nothing happened." She turned then, her expression unreadable. "And nothing will happen. We're agreed." He nodded, though disappointment settled in him like stone. "Agreed." They went through the morning motions like dancers who had practiced avoiding each other. Every move was careful, every glance too quick. The storm had redoubled overnight, snow pressing against the windows, wind battering the roof. By midday, the air in the cabin felt tight, thick with unspoken things. Clara sat at the table, carving another rough figure. Her progress had surprised him. The awkward splinters of her first attempts had given way to a shape that almost resembled a bird. Elias busied himself with repairing an old harness, though his eyes kept straying to the way firelight gilded her braid, or how her brow wrinkled when she concentrated. "Stop staring," she said suddenly, not even glancing up. "Wasn't staring," he muttered. "You were—" She set the knife down with a sharp clack. "Just like you were yesterday by the woodpile. And the day before, when I was ruining your biscuits." "Do you think I don't notice heat crept up Elias's neck? Don't flatter yourself." "Flatter myself." Clara pushed to her feet, color high in her cheeks. "Do you think I want this? Do you think I plan to feel something for a man who hides in the mountains with ghosts instead of the living?" The word hung between them. Feelings. It landed like a gunshot. "You don't know what you're saying," Elias growled. "A few weeks playing frontier woman, and you think I think what she shot back." Stepping closer, her green eyes blazing. "That I know loneliness, that I recognize someone who's running from pain, that I see the way you look at me when you think I won't see." "You see what you want to see," he snapped. "City women always do. They dream up notions about mountain men, but can't stomach the reality." "Reality?" Clara gave a short, bitter laugh. "The reality is you're terrified. Not of storms, not of wolves, not of dying alone. You're terrified of being alive again." Her words struck with the force of an axe-splitting wood. Elias rose to his full height, towering over her. His voice dropped, low and dangerous. "You don't know a damn thing about it." "Then tell me," she whispered fiercely. The firelight caught the shimmer in her eyes, but she didn't back down. "Tell me why you're so determined to bury yourself alive. Tell me about Ruth." The name on her lips broke something inside him. "You want to know," he said hoarsely. "Fine. She was 19 when we married. Prettiest girl in all of Ashford Plains. Could have had anyone. But she chose me. We built a life, side by side, working the farm until our bones ached. 2 years later, she was expecting." Clara stood frozen, listening, her breath caught in her chest. Everything was perfect. Elias continued, his voice hollow. "Until it wasn't. The baby came early, middle of winter. The doctor was drunk at the saloon. By the time he stumbled his way to us, Ruth had been laboring for hours. He tried, but his hands shook from the whiskey. The baby was turned wrong. He couldn't." Elias's voice broke. He turned from her, staring into the dark corner of the loft. "The baby died first. Ruth held on for another hour, long enough to make me promise I'd live, to be happy." His throat tightened until the words scraped raw. "I buried them together, her holding our son. I stood there while neighbors said prayers over them, but I was already dead." He drew a ragged breath, his hands clenching against his knees. "That night I burned it all. The house, the farm, every piece of the life we'd made. And I walked away into the wilderness. Been here ever since." The loft fell into silence, heavy as stone. The storm battered against the cabin, but neither of them heard it. Clara's eyes glistened, but she didn't cry. Instead, she sat down on the edge of the mattress, so close Elias could feel the warmth radiating from her. "You carry it like penance," she said softly. "But Ruth wouldn't have wanted this. She wouldn't have wanted you to bury yourself along with her. Elias shook his head, unable to meet her gaze. You don't know what she wanted. No, Clara admitted, but I know what it means to lose everything, and I know what it means to keep living anyway. Her hand brushed his, tentative, offering comfort rather than demand. For the first time in 15 years, Elias didn't pull away. The words came out of him like a confession he'd sworn never to speak. House, barn, 15 acres of wheat ready for harvest, Elias said hoarsely. I rode west until I found a place where I thought the memories couldn't follow. But they did. Clara's voice was soft, yet unflinching. Every day. He turned toward her, braced for pity, but what he saw was something else entirely. Understanding. Recognition. So now you know why I can't, he said roughly. Why we can't, she countered, or why you're afraid to try again. Her green eyes caught the firelight, gold flecks flashing as she stepped closer. I know fear. Elias, I've been running from mine for months, but there comes a point when running only leaves you more lost. It's not that simple. His voice was iron, but it wavered. Isn't it? She lifted her hand, touching his face with a tenderness he hadn't felt in years. You didn't just save me from freezing to death. You saved me from another kind of death. A life suffocated under silk and propriety, married to a man who thought of me as nothing more than a business deal. Elias caught her wrist, meaning to push her hand away. Instead, against all his intentions, he leaned into her touch. Clara, his voice cracked, low and rough. I can't control myself around you. Don't you see? I swore I'd never what she whispered, never feel again, never want again. Her other hand rose, cupping his cheek. But you do. You already do. You're halfway in love with me, Elias Beckett, whether you'll admit it or not. And her breath trembled, but her eyes did not waver. I'm halfway in love with you. The only question is whether either of us is brave enough to say it out loud. The fragile dam he had built inside himself shattered. With a sound caught between a groan and a prayer, Elias pulled her into his arms. Their lips met in a kiss born of 15 years of silence and grief. A desperate grasp at something alive. Something real. Clara made a soft sound in the back of her throat and wound her arms around his neck, kissing him with the same intensity she brought to everything else. No hesitation, no holding back. Elias' hands tangled in her braid until it unraveled, chestnut waves spilling through his fingers. When they broke apart, both were breathless, faces flushed. Clara's lips were swollen, her eyes darker now, full of want and something deeper. This changes everything, Elias said, voice raw. Everything already changed, she murmured, tracing the hard line of his jaw with trembling fingers. The moment you carried me into this cabin, nothing was the same again. He kissed her again, softer this time, gentler, trying to tell her all the things words never could. The fear was still there, gnawing at the edges, but it no longer felt stronger than the hunger to hold her. When they parted, Clara rested her forehead against his chest. What happens now, I don't know, Elias admitted. His arms tightened around her as if afraid she'd vanish. The storm will break. Then you'll have to decide. Pacific City, or... She tilted her face up, hope and uncertainty mingling in her expression. Or I stay. The words came out of him raw, unplanned. God help me. Clara, I want you to stay. But this life, it's hard. Harder than you can imagine. No society, no conveniences, she said, finishing for him. No pretense. No suffocating expectations. No contracts tying me to a man I never chose. Just this. She gestured to the cabin. To him, to the fragile but undeniable thing sparking between them. Just us. You say that now. She silenced him with another kiss, fiercer this time, claiming, I've spent 27 years living by everyone else's rules. Let me choose for once. Elias, let me choose you. He wanted to argue, to list all the reasons she'd regret it, but the determination in her eyes unraveled him. This woman had faced down hunger, storms, death itself. She had split wood, set snares, stood unflinching before truths that would have broken many men. Maybe she was strong enough. All right, he said finally, voice low, but we take it slow. When the storm breaks, I'll take you to Pine Hollow. You can send word to your aunt. Think. Decide what you really want. I'll still want this. Clara cut in firmly. I'll still want you. The rest of the day passed in a haze of touches that lingered too long, of stolen kisses that left them dizzy. Elias showed her the journal where he had carved out 15 years of solitude in ink, one lonely day at a time. Clara shared stories of her life back east, lavish dinners at the Crescent Hotel, parties where her smile was a mask, the gilded cage she had fled. They talked until their throats ached, filling in the gaps of who they had been and who they might yet become. That night, Clara didn't climb the ladder alone. Elias followed, heart pounding with a mix of longing and dread. They lay side by side on the narrow mattress, still fully clothed, but pressed so close he could feel the rhythm of her breath against his chest. I'm scared too, Clara whispered into the darkness. What if I'm not strong enough? What if you realize I'm only pretending to be brave? Elias turned to face her, tracing her cheek with calloused fingers. You survived a crash that killed everyone else. You learned to live in a cabin with a half-wild man who hadn't spoken more than 10 words in years. You're the strongest woman I've ever known. The second strongest, she corrected softly. Ruth. He breathed, the name catching but not choking him this time. She was remarkable. Clara's eyes softened. I believe she was, and I think she would have liked me. She laid her head in the hollow of his shoulder. I think she would have told you not to push me away. Elias shut his eyes, holding her tighter than he had held anyone in 15 long years. For the first time since Ruth and the child they lost, saying her name didn't feel like drowning. It felt like release. They had fallen asleep, tangled together like shipwrecked survivors clinging to driftwood. Outside, the storm had begun to weaken, its fury spent at last. But inside the cabin, something else had taken root, fragile as new grass breaking through snow, yet stubbornly alive. Elias woke at first light to find Clara watching him. Her hair was tousled, her expression soft in the dim glow. What he asked, voice low and rough with sleep. She smiled faintly. You look younger when you sleep. The lines ease, and I can see who you were before all of this, before I became a ghost. He muttered, You're not a ghost anymore. She leaned forward and brushed a gentle kiss across his lips. Ghosts can't love. And you, Elias Beckett, are very capable of love. The truth of it terrified him. Yet as the early sun spilled gold across her face, Elias realized that some things were worth the fear. Some people were worth the risk. I can't control myself around you, he said, repeating the warning he had once given. But now the words sounded like a vow. Clara smiled, and in that instant, she was more than pretty. She was luminous. Good. I don't want you controlled. I want you exactly as you are. Wild, wary, and mine. Yours, he answered, sealing it with a kiss that tasted of new beginnings. For 3 days, they lived in a fragile peace. They learned each other's rhythms, moved around one another with ease, and built something precious inside that mountain cabin. They shared laughter, quiet silences, and the kind of tentative joy neither had thought possible again. Then Shadow's sudden warning broke the morning stillness. The stallion's deep, urgent snort carried through the frosty air. Elias was on his feet in an instant, rifle in hand. He moved to the window, breath fogging against the glass. 3 riders were picking their way up the steep path, their mounts struggling against the snowdrifts. "Up to the loft," he ordered sharply. Clara froze, coffee cup halfway to her lips. "What is it, riders?" 3 of them, and nobody makes this climb without a purpose. He checked the rifle's chamber. His instincts told him this was no casual visit. Could be lawmen, could be worse. Either way, you stay hidden. Clara set down the cup deliberately, her chin tilting with quiet defiance. "No, this isn't up for discussion. You're right, it isn't." She crossed to the second rifle, the one he had taught her to handle, and checked it with steady hands. 3 armed men approach our home with unclear intentions. I'm not hiding like a frightened child. Our home. The words jolted through him even as he recognized the steel in her voice. This was not the same delicate city woman he had carried from the wreck. "Clara." "They're close now." Elias pressed. She positioned herself near the side window, rifle angled but unseen. "Do you recognize them?" Elias studied the riders. The lead man sat his horse with the posture of wealth and command, his long coat tailored and expensive, his expression sharp. The other 2 had the look of professional guns hired muscle who knew how to handle trouble. "No," Elias muttered, though his gut tightened as a thought struck him. He turned to Clara, voice low. "Is there any chance your fiancé would send men after you?" Her face drained of color. Richard has the money and connections. But how could he know about the crash? She swallowed hard. If he traced the coach line and learned about the accident, he'd know I might have survived. Elias's mind went cold, shifting into survival mode. What kind of man is he? Would he come himself? Clara leaned toward the window, then gasped. "Oh, God! What the man in front? It's him. That's Richard Harlow." "You're certain?" Elias asked grimly. "I was engaged to him for 3 years. Yes, I'm certain." Her knuckles whitened on the rifle stock. "Elias, he's dangerous. His family controls half the shipping contracts back east. He has judges, politicians, even lawmen in his pocket. Well, he doesn't own Silverpine." Elias growled. He moved to the door. "Stay back, but keep that rifle ready. If shooting starts, I know what to do." Clara's voice was steady. Her eyes met his, unwavering. "Whatever happens, I'm not going back with him." "No," Elias agreed, grim determination settling over him like armor. "You're not." He stepped out into the sharp winter air, rifle carried loosely, but ready. The 3 riders had reached the flat before the cabin, their horses blowing steam in the cold. Up close, Richard Harlow looked every inch the polished Easterner handsome in a soft, cultured way, his pale skin untouched by real labor. He dismounted with a calculated elegance, cold blue eyes sweeping Elias from head to toe. "Gentlemen," Elias said evenly, his voice calm as iron. "Long ride to make in this weather." Richard's smile was practiced, but his eyes remained cold. "Indeed. But then, I'd ride through hell itself to recover stolen property." Elias didn't blink. "Don't see any property here. Just my cabin and my mountain." "Come now," Richard replied smoothly. "We both know Clara is inside. Her trunk was found among the wreckage. Miraculous that she alone survived. Don't you don't know any Clara? Elias's tone was flat. Storm scattered plenty of debris down the mountain. You'll find odds and ends all over. Richard's smile deepened, Predator's satisfaction flickering there. I've made inquiries in Pine Hollow. They call you the Hermit of Ironwood Ridge. Elias Beckett, formerly of Ashford Plains. Elias's grip tightened slightly on his rifle. Richard had done his homework. He wasn't here by chance. Behind the window. Clara's pulse hammered, her finger steady on the trigger as she kept her sights trained on the man who once claimed her as his possession. She had left Richard Harlow behind in another world. Now he had climbed into hers. Elias planted his boots firm in the snow, shoulders squared. If you've come looking for trouble, you'll find it. But if you've come thinking you'll ride off with someone against her will, you'd best turn those horses around now. Richard's smile vanished, replaced by the first hint of genuine malice. The accusation hit Elias like a hammer blow. Richard Harlow's voice, smooth and mocking, carried through the frozen air. Wanted for questioning in connection with a fire that killed 2 people 15 years ago, Harlow said, holding a folded document like a weapon. Your wife and child. Wasn't it Elias's blood went cold? The words cut deeper than any bullet could. Those weren't charges, he said hoarsely. That was my family. So you say. Richard went on silkily. But you know how a clever prosecutor might spin it. A man burns down his own farm, flees across state lines, raises plenty of questions. Harlow flicked the paper open with a flourish. See, I had new warrants drawn up. Amazing what money can accomplish if you know the right hands to grease. Elias's jaw clenched. Forged papers don't mean a damn thing out here. Perhaps not on this mountain. Richard allowed, his cold smile tightening. But in Boston, in St. Louis, in Washington, they'll mean everything, unless, of course. His voice dropped low, venom wrapped in velvet. We can reach an understanding. Clara's my fiancée. We have a contract signed and witnessed. She's confused, likely addled by trauma. I've come to bring her home. Elias's voice turned to iron. Even if I knew this woman you claim, she's free to make her own choices. Free? Richard laughed sharply. You clearly don't understand how the world works. Mountain man. Clara's father owes me a fortune. Our marriage settles that debt. Without it, her family falls into ruin. Her sister's in the street, her mother begging bread. Is that the choice you think she'd make before Elias could answer? The cabin door opened. Clara stepped out into the cold, her chin high, though Elias saw fear flicker in her eyes. She had shed every trace of the Boston socialite. Her cheeks were wind-burnished, her hands calloused, her frame draped in Elias's oversized coat. My sisters, Clara said clearly, are better off in the streets than bound to a man like you. Richard's mask cracked, anger flashing across his polished features. Clara, darling, you've had your little adventure. Time to come home. I am home, she answered, her voice steady as bedrock. With this man. Richard's gaze raked her up and down, disgust curling his lip. Look at you, wearing rags, sunburnt, roughened like some camp follower. He's ruined you. You're barely recognizable. Clara's reply was quiet, but it rang with finality. I am finally myself. Richard's face darkened to something ugly. Enough of this. You'll come with me now or I'll see Beckett arrested for kidnapping, assault, arson, whatever charges I decide. You know I can make them stick. Try it, Elias said, shifting the rifle slightly. The two hired men flanking Richard tensed, hands drifting toward their weapons. "Elias, no," Clara said quickly, moving closer. Then she turned to Richard. "I'll make you a bargain. Leave now. Tell my father the wedding is off, and I'll sign papers releasing any claim to my inheritance. You'll get your money another way." "I don't want money," Richard snarled, his smooth facade shattered. "I want what's mine. What was promised. I am not property," Clara shot back, her voice sharp as a whip. "Aren't you?" Richard sneered, nodding to his men. "Take her." Everything happened at once. The hired guns reached for their pistols. Elias shoved Clara behind him, his rifle rising in a practiced sweep. The sharp crack of gunfire shattered the frozen stillness of Ironwood Ridge. One gunman spun away, clutching his shoulder, snow blooming red beneath him. The second dove behind the horses, returning fire wildly. Richard, with a snake's speed, drew a pistol from his coat and leveled it at Elias. Another shot rang out. The pistol spun from Richard's grip, clattering uselessly into the snow. Clara stood steady, rifle braced against her shoulder, smoke curling from the barrel. Her face was pale but resolute. "The next one," she said coldly, "goes in your chest." The remaining gunman froze, his hands raised. "Ain't worth dying for. Mr. Harlow." Richard cradled his bleeding hand, shock written plain across his aristocratic features. "You shot me. You actually shot me. You threatened the man I love," Clara said simply, lowering her aim but keeping it steady. "What did you expect?" Richard gave a bitter laugh. "Love, you've known him, 2 weeks you'd throw away fortune, family, everything. For that I would throw away everything to avoid becoming what you would make me." Clara replied without hesitation. "A trinket, an ornament, a pawn in your business deals. Yes, Richard, I choose love over that every time." Elias held his rifle trained on the injured gunman, while his heart warred between pride and fear. Pride in Clara's courage, fear at how close she had come to being lost to him. Richard spat into the snow, his pale face twisted with rage. "You can't hide here forever. I have resources. I have connections. I have witnesses." Clara cut him off sharply. "2 hired guns who will testify that you came here with forged warrants and violent intent. How will your business partners like that scandal? How will your political allies stomach it?" Her words landed like blows. Richard paled further. "And if that isn't enough," Clara went on, stepping closer, "I'll write to every newspaper in Boston. I kept diaries. Richard, every insult, every time you struck me when you'd been drinking, every mistress you flaunted, every bribe you paid. Imagine how your Senate campaign will look when the world reads the truth." "You wouldn't dare," he hissed. "Try me," she said, her smile as sharp as winter ice. "I've learned to survive out here. I've learned to fight. Most of all, I've learned I am stronger than you ever imagined." Silence stretched between them, taut as a bowstring. At last, Richard staggered to his feet, clutching his bleeding hand. "This isn't over." "Yes, it is," Elias said quietly. His voice carried the weight of the mountain itself. "Because if you come back, if you send anyone else, I won't aim for shoulders or hands. Mountain justice is simple. You threaten what's mine. You don't leave the mountain." Richard looked from Elias to Clara, perhaps realizing for the first time that he had truly lost. He swung onto his horse one-handed, his face ashen with fury and humiliation. His surviving man followed quickly, dragging the wounded companion up into his saddle. Snow muffled the sound of their retreat until only silence remained. Clara lowered her rifle slowly. Her hands were shaking now that the danger had passed, but her eyes never wavered from Elias. He stepped toward her, laying a steadying hand on her shoulder. "You saved my life," he said, voice rough with emotion. Her chin lifted, trembling but firm. "And you saved mine." Again. They stood together in the snow, the storm clouds breaking above, sunlight piercing through. For the first time since Ruth's death, Elias Beckett felt the iron grip of the past begin to loosen. Clara Whitfield was no longer just a guest in his cabin. She was his partner, his equal, and she had chosen him freely. And for the first time in 15 years, he allowed himself to believe in tomorrow. Richard Harlow's retreat left the mountains unnervingly quiet. The echo of gunfire still hung in the air when the three riders finally disappeared down the trail, dwindling into specks against the snow. Only then did Clara's hands tremble, her rifle slipping from her grip. Elias was there before her knees gave way, holding her against his chest as the tremors racked her frame. "You did good," he murmured, pressing his cheek to her hair. "Better than good. You were steady when it counted." Her voice broke against his shoulder. "I shot him. Elias, I really shot him. I've never. You protected us." He cut in gently. "You defended our home. Don't ever forget that." When he pulled back, her face was pale, but her green eyes held a spark of iron. "How did you know about his weaknesses?" "That diary." A shaky laugh left her lips. "There is no diary." But Richard never could stand the thought of scandal. "I gambled his fear of public disgrace outweighed his hunger for control. And it worked." Elias stared at her a long moment, then kissed her forehead with rough tenderness. "Brilliant woman," he said quietly. "Brave, brilliant woman." Clara's voice dropped, uncertain. "Is it really over? Will he stay away?" Elias glanced toward the empty trail. "Men like Harlow are cowards at their core. You showed him strength, and you threatened what he values most. His reputation. He won't come back." But even as he said it, a coil of tension lingered inside him. The storm of bullets had tested them both, but it had also forged something stronger than words. Clara hadn't just chosen to stay. She had fought for them. For this life. For him. "No regrets?" Elias asked, searching her face. "You could have gone back to Boston comfort, to safety." She answered with a kiss so fierce it took his breath. "The only safety I want is in your arms. The only comfort is knowing we face whatever comes together." As they walked back toward the cabin, Elias realized something inside him had shifted. For 15 years, his life had been survival, not living. Now Clara had torn down the last of his walls. It was no longer about letting her stay. It was about truly letting her in. Later, when the adrenaline had cooled, they dragged the wounded gunman Morrison to the cabin wall where Elias could tend to his shoulder. Clara cleaned the wound with whiskey, her hands steady even when Morrison hissed in pain. The outlaw looked between them, then muttered, "Harlow hired us in Red Bluff. Said we were reclaiming stolen property. Showed us bounty papers. Warrants. All official looking. All forged," Clara said flatly. Though she still tied the bandage with care, Richard was always skilled at paperwork. Morrison's eyes flickered to Elias. "There's more. About that fire in Ashford Plains. 15 years ago. Harlow's family arranged those warrants. Said they needed leverage in case you ever surfaced again." Elias froze, knife motionless in his hand. "What do you know about that fire?" Morrison swallowed hard. "Harlow's uncle. He's a judge back east. They dug up your case when Clara disappeared. Looked at witness statements. found records of the doctor who treated your wife and babe. Case was ruled a tragedy, but they drew up new warrants anyway. Figured if they branded you a murderer, no one would listen when you tried to stand in their way. So they knew I was innocent, Elias said bitterly. But it didn't matter. Truth never matters to men like them. Clara tied off the bandage, rising to her feet. Her jaw was set with quiet fury. "Will you testify to this?" she asked Morrison. "Tell a sheriff what Harlow tried to do here." Morrison looked at her with something close to respect. "You patched me up when you could have let me bleed." "Yeah, I'll testify. Ain't no loyalty left in me for a man who lies about murder charges." They kept the 2 surviving gunmen under watch through the night, rifles close at hand. The wind outside keened against the cabin walls, but inside, the fire crackled steady. Clara dozed against Elias's shoulder, and he let himself hold her, something he'd once thought he'd never allow again. By dawn, he saddled Shadow and led the men down the trail. At a crossroads halfway to Pine Hollow, he halted them. His rifle rested casually across the saddle, but his voice carried steel. "You've got 2 choices. Ride to the sheriff. Tell him the truth about Harlow, or keep riding until you're far from Silverpine Territory. But if I ever see you on my mountain again, you won't walk away." The uninjured gunman nodded quickly. "We'll find the sheriff. Morrison's right. This ain't worth dying for." Elias watched them go before turning Shadow back toward Ironwood Ridge. Snow muffled the sound of hooves, but his thoughts churned. Harlow's reach stretched farther than he liked. The forged warrants might fade into dust here in the high country, but Clara was right. If they ever needed to leave Silverpine, his past could catch them. When he returned, Clara was pacing the cabin like a caged wolf. Her eyes flew to him as soon as he stepped inside. "What if they don't tell the truth?" she demanded. "What if Richard sends more men?" Elias caught her hands, steadying her. "Then we'll handle it. But I don't think he will. You called his bluff perfectly." Her breath hitched. "I was terrified. Elias, when he mentioned your wife, the fire, I realized those lies could follow you forever. We need to clear your name properly." Elias shook his head. "Those papers have sat gathering dust for 15 years. Sheriff Cobb here knows me. He knows I'm no killer. That's enough. But what if?" Her voice softened. "What if we ever want to travel, to build a future outside these mountains?" He studied her face, saw both her fear and her hope. "Are you assuming we have a future to plan for?" "Yes," Clara whispered, her fingers tightening on his. "I am." The admission hung between them like a promise, for the first time in years. Elias let himself believe in tomorrow, not as a man haunted by tragedy, but as a man who might finally deserve a second chance. That night, as the firelight cast a soft glow over the cabin walls, Elias held Clara close, marveling at how natural it felt to speak of the future as though it were theirs to shape. "We can make whatever life you want," he whispered against her hair. "Here in Silverpine, or somewhere else. Wherever you go, I'll follow." Clara pulled back slightly, searching his face. Even back east, he stiffened at the thought of cities and courts and the world that had once turned its back on him. But he forced himself to meet her gaze. Before he could answer, she shook her head quickly. "I don't want to go back. I just need to know if this life has limits, if there are boundaries I should understand." "There are no boundaries," Elias said firmly. "If you wanted to walk into Pacific City tomorrow, I'd ride at your side. I'm done hiding. You've reminded me what it means to fight for something instead of running." They spent that evening with paper and candlelight. mapping not only the immediate repairs and supplies the cabin would need, but also daring to imagine more. Clara's voice trembled with hope as she spoke of Pine Hollow, of starting a little school there so children of miners and ranchers could learn their letters instead of growing up in ignorance. Elias, after a long pause, admitted that he had always dreamed of raising horses, breeding Shadow with strong mares, and building something lasting that might outlive him. Ruth always wanted horses, he said softly. Said they were freedom given form. Tell me about her, Clara asked gently. Not the grief. Tell me who she was. And so he did. He spoke of Ruth's easy laugh, her dreadful cooking that even the chickens turned away from, her stubbornness in learning to shoot, though he'd tried to forbid it, and how she'd sewn curtains for their first little home, from cloth she'd saved coin by coin. For the first time in 15 years, he could speak her name without feeling his throat close like a vice. She sounds remarkable, Clara said when he finished. I wish I could thank her. Elias frowned slightly. For what? For loving you first, for shaping you into the man who pulled me from the snow and gave me another chance. Clara traced lazy circles on his palm, her touch grounding him. I know you'll always carry her with you, and I'm not threatened by that. Love doesn't lessen by being shared. It deepens. He turned her hand over and kissed her palm reverently. How did you grow so wise? She smiled faintly. Almost dying tends to change a person's view of things. That, and finding something worth fighting for. The next few days passed in a blur of rebuilding. Morrison and his partner had ridden into Pine Hollow as promised, and before long Sheriff Cobb himself came up the mountain trail. The sheriff, a grizzled veteran with a limp from an old range war, listened with growing anger as Elias and Clara recounted the truth of forged warrants and marriage contracts signed under duress. I'll see that Boston hears about this Harlow fellow, Cobb growled. I'll send word through every telegraph line until the truth's nailed down. A man who hides behind papers and bribes won't like his name dragged through the mud. When the sheriff rose to leave, he tipped his hat respectfully to Clara. Don't reckon he'll bother you again, Miss Whitfield? Mrs. Beckett, Clara corrected before she even realized what she had said. Color flushed her cheeks, but Elias didn't hesitate. Not yet, he said, surprising himself. But soon, if she'll have me. Clara's eyes went wide, and the sheriff chuckled. About time, Beckett. 15 years is too long for any man to walk alone. After the sheriff left, Clara stood before Elias, her green eyes luminous in the firelight. Did you mean it? About marriage, I meant every word. He cupped her face between his calloused hands. But the question is, do you want it? Not a bargain or a contract. A real marriage. A life of work and love. Good years and hard ones. Maybe children. Her answer was immediate, cutting off his worries. Yes. Yes to all of it. 2 weeks later, under a sky so clear it seemed scrubbed clean, they were wed in the little clapboard church in Pine Hollow. Clara wore a modest dress bought from the general store, her hair crowned with hothouse flowers gifted by Mrs. Cobb. Elias had trimmed his beard and even his hair, standing straighter than anyone remembered seeing him, dressed in his one good shirt. Sheriff and Mrs. Cobb stood as witnesses, along with Doc Morrison, no relation to the gunman, and a handful of curious townsfolk who came to see the hermit of Ironwood Ridge take a bride. Clara had written to her sisters back east, explaining her choice with trembling honesty, promising to send what support she could. Whether forgiveness would come, she didn't yet know, but peace radiated from her as though she'd stepped into her truest self. Do you, Clara Whitfield, take this man Reverend Phillips intoned, his voice solemn, his words ancient yet new. "I do," Clara said, her vow ringing as clear as mountain air. When Elias's turn came, his voice caught for just a moment. The last time he had spoken such words, he'd been young and certain the world held only joy. Now he knew better. He knew happiness could shatter like thin ice, that promises could be broken by death or fire. But he also knew that without love, a man wasn't truly alive. "I do," he said, and for the first time in years, the words tasted like truth. They returned to the cabin not as two solitary souls bound by circumstance, but as husband and wife. To their astonishment, the townsfolk had slipped up the trail while they were gone. New curtains framed the windows. A handmade quilt lay folded across the bed. Jars of preserves lined the shelves. Gifts from a community that had decided Elias Beckett was no longer the mountain recluse, but a man building a home with a woman he loved. Clara touched the lace doily placed upon their table with trembling fingers. "They barely know me. They know you've healed me," Elias said simply. "And in a place like Pine Hollow, that's enough." That night, lying close as husband and wife, Clara whispered into the quiet, "Any regrets?" "Only one," Elias said after a pause, "that I can't give you the life you were raised for. No fancy houses, no servants, no glittering ballroom." She silenced his doubts with a kiss. "I was born to be here, Elias. Everything before this was just waiting, counting time until I found where I belong." Later, when she drifted into sleep beside him, Elias stood at the window, moonlight silvering the snow outside. Somewhere in the wide country, Richard Harlow was nursing both his wounded pride and his wounded hand. Somewhere, Clara's family was reeling from scandal and broken promises. But here in the cabin, with the woman he loved sleeping peacefully at his side, Elias Beckett finally felt what it was to come home. Inside the cabin that had once been his fortress of solitude, Elias felt something he had not known in half a lifetime peace. These walls had been raised to shield him from the world, to keep out fresh wounds after he had lost everything. Yet Clara had taught him that walls not only kept pain away, they could just as easily shut out light, laughter, and love. What he had built as a prison had become a home because of her. She had fought for him with grit, with her rifle, with her unwavering choice to stand by his side when reason told her to leave. Now it was his turn to choose, not once, but every morning. He resolved to wake with gratitude instead of grief, to build rather than endure, to love her fully even though loss might come again. Fear no longer ruled him. The promise of love did. "I can't control myself around you," he whispered to Clara as she slept, echoing words that had once been a warning, but were now a vow. She stirred in her sleep, murmuring his name, and he eased back into bed, pulling her against his chest. Tomorrow would bring tasks stocking provisions before deep winter, patching fences, planning for spring, but tonight belonged to them. Two souls who had found each other against every odd now rested in the certainty of love chosen and earned. Above the hearth, the carved wolves he had once whittled in loneliness stood like sentinels, no longer reminders of solitude. They had become symbols of a new truth that even the wildest hearts could belong to a pack. Outside, the Silverpine Mountains stretched into forever, holding their cabin in a timeless embrace. A year later, in the spring of 1880, the snow melted earlier than usual, leaving wildflowers peeking through the thawed ground. Clara stood in the doorway of a new cabin Elias had built with his own hands, larger than the old one. It had proper rooms, glass windows, and a wide porch where she liked to sit in the evenings. She rested her hand against the curve of her belly, smiling as she felt the gentle flutter of life within. In the corral, Elias worked with a young mare, his voice calm and patient as he stroked her neck. "Easy now, girl. Nothing to fear here," he soothed. Clara's smile widened at the tenderness in his tone. The man who once lived in silence with only Shadow for company now ran a modest horse-breeding venture. 3 mares grazed in the meadow below, their foals kicking at the spring air, a small beginning to the dream he had dared to share with her. The old cabin still stood, now transformed into a workshop where Elias carved sturdy furniture for families in Pine Hollow. Twice a week, Clara welcomed children there, teaching them letters and numbers, their laughter ringing against the mountain slopes. A sign hung over its door, Beckett Homestead, established 1879. A shout drew her gaze. Young Tommy Morrison, no kin to the gunman of that name, trotted up on his pony, waving an envelope high over his head. Clara traded him a molasses cookie for his trouble, then glanced down at the letter, recognizing her sister Margaret's handwriting. The two had been writing for months, the sting of Clara's choices softening into a tentative acceptance. This letter carried news that made her catch her breath. Richard Harlow's empire had collapsed. He had been exposed for falsifying shipping manifests, facing charges that would have destroyed him. Rather than stand trial, he fled to Europe. His engagement to a senator's daughter was broken, his fortune scattered, his reputation in tatters. "Divine justice," Clara murmured, then raised her voice. "Elias, come see this." He swung over the corral fence with an ease that still surprised her, broad-shouldered and strong despite 40 winters. His face had softened, grief lines easing with the steady rhythm of mountain living and love. Reading over her shoulder, he gave a low whistle. "Couldn't have happened to a more deserving man." "There's more," Clara continued, eyes widening. "Margaret says Father's debts were suddenly paid by an anonymous benefactor. The family is safe. The girls can finish their schooling." Elias pressed a kiss to her temple. "Mysterious benefactor? Huh. Wonder who might have arranged such a thing." Clara narrowed her eyes. Mock serious. "You sold horses, didn't you?" Elias Beckett. "Did you settle my father's debts without telling me?" He shrugged with deliberate innocence. "Maybe I did. A man doesn't stand by while his wife's kin suffer. If I can fix it, I will." She threw her arms around his neck. "You impossible, wonderful man." Their kiss was long and certain, interrupted only when Tommy made exaggerated gagging sounds from his pony. They laughed, breathless with joy. Clara returned to the letter. "Margaret writes that she wants to visit. She's considering a teaching post in Pacific City and would stop here along the way." Elias's brow furrowed with a flicker of unease, an old reflex from years of solitude. Clara touched his arm gently. "Only if you're comfortable. This is our home, and no one crosses its threshold without your welcome." He exhaled, the tension easing. His hand found its place against her belly. "Might be good for the little one to know your people. And Margaret sounds wise, choosing teaching over the kind of marriage hunting you once escaped." "Our child will know both our families," Clara said softly. Not long before, they had traveled to the Ashford Plains, standing together by Ruth's grave. Elias had felt the weight of the past lift as he introduced Clara to the woman he had once loved, telling Ruth silently that he had kept his promise to live, to find joy again. The elderly caretaker of the cemetery had wept when she saw him, confessing she had wondered for years what became of the broken farmer who had lost everything. "Mrs. Beckett." A familiar voice called from down the trail. Doc Morrison rode up, his bag bouncing at his side. He insisted on checking Clara's condition once again. The visit was routine, his manner brisk but kind. Afterward, he snapped his bag shut. "Mother and child are strong. I'd wager this little one will greet the summer sun without trouble." As he mounted to leave, the doctor paused. "One more thing. I had a letter from a colleague in Boston. Seems, Elias, your old case in the Ashford Plains has been officially closed. New evidence, misconduct from the prosecution, whatever the details. Your name is cleared, no charges remain." Clara squeezed Elias's hand, tears of relief bright in her eyes. At last, the final shadow of his past had been swept away. Elias looked toward the horizon, the peaks of Silverpine glowing gold in the spring light. For the first time in decades, he felt wholly free. A husband, a father-to-be, a man no longer chained by sorrow, but carried forward by love. After Doc Morrison rode away down the trail, Elias and Clara wandered to their favorite rise overlooking the valley, the same place where months before they had shared their first kiss. The Silverpine peaks still clung to patches of snow, but the meadows below were alive with wildflowers, painting the land in colors that promised new beginnings. "I never thought I'd see this day," Elias said quietly. 40 years old, married again, a child on the way, and for once building a life instead of just surviving. Any regrets, Clara teased, repeating the question she had once asked him during darker days. "Only that I let the years slip by before I found you," he answered, pulling her close, his arms wrapped around her and the small life they both protected. "But maybe I needed those years to be ready. Ready for this. Ready for you." Clara turned her face toward him, eyes glowing in the last light of day. "I wasn't ready either. If I had met you back in Boston when I was still sheltered and foolish, I wouldn't have seen what we have now. I would have only noticed the surface, a mountain man, a hard cabin, a rough life. But out here I saw the truth. I saw home. I saw the man who saved me in every way that matters." They stood together as the sky deepened to rose and gold, horses grazing in the pasture below, smoke curling from their chimney where supper simmered. It was not the life she had once been groomed for, but it was richer than any fortune Boston society had promised. Clara's voice softened. "What do you think Ruth would say about all this?" Elias thought for a long moment, then smiled faintly. "I think she'd tell me it was about time. She was always telling me to laugh more, brood less, and I think she would have liked your stubbornness, your strength, the way you never let me wallow too long." "I'd like to think we'd have been friends," Clara said warmly, "united in our frustration over your stubborn streak." "My stubborn streak saved your life," he countered, "and almost cost me my chance to stay." She shot back. "But I was more stubborn than you." "More stubborn," he corrected automatically, chuckling, "though I suppose stubborner fits for mountain talk." They laughed together, the kind of easy laughter that belonged to people who had fought hard for joy and refused to let it slip away. As dusk fell, they made their way back to the cabin. Inside, the home they had built together bore the marks of both their hands, shelves lined with books Elias had carved, Clara's writing desk by the window, tiny baby clothes folded neatly on a chair, stitched during long winter evenings. Above the mantel, the wooden wolves kept watch, no longer symbols of solitude, but guardians of family. Over supper, Clara stirred the stew and said casually, "I've been thinking about names. If the baby is a boy, I'd like Samuel, after your father. And if it's a girl," Elias asked, "Mary Charlotte." He answered softly, his voice unsteady, For both the women who made me whole. Clara's eyes filled. Mary Charlotte Beckett. I love it. Later, as they prepared for bed, a lone wolf's howl rose across the mountains. For a moment it sounded like the old loneliness, sharp and wild. But moments later, another voice answered, deep and steady. Clara smiled as she lay down beside Elias. Not alone anymore, she thought. None of us are. She turned to him, eyes heavy with contentment. Do you remember what you told me once? That you couldn't control yourself around me? Best warning I ever gave, and you never listened to. Elias murmured, his lips brushing her hair. The city woman didn't listen, Clara whispered, and the mountain man took her in. He finished, and against all odds and sense, they made a life. Outside, the Silverpine night wrapped around their cabin like a benediction. Inside, two souls who had once been broken clung to each other, building tomorrow out of the ashes of yesterday. The wooden wolves on the mantel kept their silent vigil, witnesses to a story written not in grand gestures, but in small choices, the choice to stay, the choice to fight, the choice to love. In years to come, when little Mary Charlotte Beckett was old enough to ask how her parents met, Elias and Clara would tell her about a storm, a rescue, and how two scarred hearts learned to beat as one. But that tale would wait for another day. Tonight there was only peace, only gratitude, only the quiet rhythm of two people at rest in their sanctuary. The woman from the city and the man of the mountains were no longer fugitives from their past. They walked together now toward a future they could not predict but were ready to face. Side by side, love, they discovered, was both simple and complicated, fragile and enduring. It asked for courage, demanded sacrifice, but gave back more than either had ever dreamed. Overhead, the stars wheeled eternal. The mountains kept their silent watch, and in a cabin built on hope, a family dreamed of spring and all the seasons yet to come. The story of Elias and Clara is more than romance. It is a reminder that life does not end when we lose, and that age or pain cannot lock us away from love. For those of us over 60, it can feel like our years are already written, that chances for new beginnings have passed. But Elias proves otherwise. After burying his wife and child, he built walls to protect himself. Yet those same walls kept joy out. Clara, running from a world of empty promises, taught him that true companionship is not about contracts, wealth, or appearances. It is about daily choices to stay, to forgive, and to love. What can we take from this? That healing may arrive later than we expect, but it still arrives. That even in solitude, the human heart longs for connection. And that strength is not in hardening ourselves, but in daring to remain open, even after heartbreak. The lesson is simple. It is never too late to rebuild, never too late to choose love, never too late to let someone in. Thank you so much for spending your time with us today. Your support means the world, and it keeps us bringing more stories that touch the heart. If this story moved you, please like, share, and subscribe, and join us again for the next journey. Until then, take care, and remember love and hope are timeless.